title, The Echoes of Room 309. It had been raining in Seattle for 3 days straight, a relentless gray curtain that washed away the grime from the streets, but couldn't cleanse the gnawing sense of dread settling in Elias' stomach. Elias Thorne was a man who lived in silence. As an audio forensic analyst, he spent his life listening to things others tried to hide. He cleaned up 911 calls for court cases, isolated whispers from blackmail recordings, and filtered out ambient noise to hear the last words of missing people. He was accustomed to the darker side of human nature. But the package that arrived at his door that Tuesday morning was different. It wasn't digital. It wasn't a cloud link or a USB drive. It was a heavy, waterlogged cardboard box containing a reel-to-reel tape, a technology that hadn't been standard since the late 70s. There was no return address on the box, only a hastily scribbled note taped to the reel. The handwriting was shaky, frantic, as if written by someone whose hand was uncontrollably trembling. It read, "Don't listen to the background noise. Focus on the voice. If you listen to the background, they will hear you." Elias, a rational man, dismissed the note as the ramblings of a paranoid client. He loaded the heavy reel onto his old player, a machine he mostly kept for decoration, and threaded the magnetic tape through the heads. He put on his noise-canceling headphones, leaned back in his leather chair, and pressed play. The first minute was just static, a thick, white noise that sounded like strong wind blowing across a microphone. Elias reached for his equalizer, adjusting the frequencies to reduce the hiss. Slowly, a voice emerged from the noise. It was the sound of a room. To an untrained ear, silence is just silence. But for Elias, every room has a room tone, a unique sonic fingerprint created by the air conditioning, the hum of electricity, the size of the walls. This room sounded small, concrete, and damp. Then a voice spoke. It was a man's voice, hoarse and dry, as if he hadn't used his vocal cords in days. "Is this being recorded?" the voice asked. Another voice, deeper and more gravelly, replied, "It is being recorded. Tell us about the window, Mr. Vance." Elias paused the tape. He typed Mr. Vance missing person into his search bar. Nothing useful came up. He pressed play again. The man on the tape, Vance, began speaking in a trembling whisper. "It wasn't a window," Vance said. "That's what you don't understand. I checked the blueprints. I checked the hotel's construction history. Room 309 is in the middle of the building. It doesn't have an exterior wall. But when I woke up that night, there was a window. And outside the window, it wasn't the city. It was a field of tall, black grass that wasn't moving in the wind." The detective's voice scoffed. "We're not here for ghost stories, Vance." "Where is she?" Elias leaned closer. The audio quality was remarkably good, surprisingly so for an old tape. He could hear the wet sound of Vance's tongue against his teeth. He could hear the rustle of his shirt fabric. But then Elias heard something else. He remembered the warning written on the note. Ignore the background noise. But his job was to clean up the audio, to hear everything. He isolated a low-frequency hum in the background of the recording. It wasn't air conditioning. It was a rhythmic thumping. Thump, 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 thump. It sounded like a heartbeat, but it was much too slow. It was beating once every 10 seconds, and it was getting louder. Elias advanced the audio timeline. The interrogation went on for hours. Vance kept insisting that the woman, the girl named Sarah, hadn't left the room through the door. He claimed she had been pulled out through a window that shouldn't have been there. She looked out at the field, Vance whispered, his voice trembling with fear. She said she saw someone walking in the tall grass, someone holding a lantern. And then the glass. It didn't break. It melted. It turned to liquid, and the wind pulled her out. The detective on the tape became angry, slamming his fist on the table. The sound suddenly amplified in Elias' headphones, making him jump. "Tell us where the body is," the detective shouted. "There's no body," Vance shouted back. "Just grass. And now I can hear the lantern swaying. I can hear it creaking." A shiver ran down Elias' spine. He stopped the tape. He took off his headphones and rubbed his eyes. The rain was still beating against his apartment window. He stood up to get a glass of water, trying to shake off the strangeness of the story. It was just a performance, he told himself. A radio drama project that someone wanted him to fix. He headed towards his room. Elias was in the kitchen, the floorboards creaking beneath his socks. He poured himself a glass of water and looked at his reflection in the dark kitchen window. Then he froze. A faint sound coming from the speakers in his living room caught his attention. He had left the speakers on, but he had paused the tape. He had done it. He slowly went back into the living room. The tape reels weren't spinning. The machine was off, but a sound was coming from the monitor. CHRR, CHRR, CHRR. It was the rhythmic sound of rusty metal swinging back and forth, like the handle of a lantern. Elias checked the connections. The tape player was off. The computer was muted. It was impossible for this sound to be coming from there. He reached to remove the reels, but as his fingers touched the plastic, he received a powerful jolt of static electricity, so strong that his hand went numb. He recoiled. Suddenly, the reels began to spin on their own. They spun incredibly fast, blurring into a gray wheel. The speakers crackled to life, not with the interrogator's voice, but with a new sound. It was the sound of a door opening. Elias recognized the creak of the hinges. It was the distinctive, loud sound of his own apartment's front door. He spun around, facing his hallway. His front door was deadbolted, just as he had left it. But the sound continued from the speakers. He heard footsteps, heavy, wet footsteps walking across the wooden floor. Step, step, step. The footsteps on the recording matched the layout of his apartment. They went down the hall, paused in the kitchen, and then moved toward the studio. Elias backed away, pressing against his desk, his heart pounding against his ribs with the same slow, throbbing rhythm he had heard on the tape earlier. The voice came again from the speakers. It was Vance, but he wasn't talking to the interrogator anymore. His voice was right next to the microphone, intimate and wet. "I told you not to listen to the background," Vance whispered. "I told you. Now a window has opened for you too." The power went out in Elias' apartment. The room plunged into complete darkness, save for the faint, sickly yellow light of the streetlights outside, filtered through the rain. But something was wrong. The light coming through the window wasn't the orange yellow of the streetlights. It was a soft, moonlit blue, and the sound of the rain had stopped. In fact, all the sounds of the city, the sirens, the cars, the distant hum of traffic, had vanished. There was only the sound of tall grass rustling in the wind. Elias slowly turned towards his window. He lived on the 4th floor of a brick building in the heart of downtown Seattle. He should have been able to see the brick wall of the building next door. But the bricks were gone. The glass of his window was rippling, like the surface of a pond after a stone has been thrown into it. Through the wavering glass, he didn't see the street. He saw a field, an endless, flat field of black grass stretching out beneath a starless sky. And in the distance, a small point of light swayed back and forth. Chirp, chirp. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking so badly that he dropped it. The screen lit up on the floor. No signal. He grabbed a flashlight from his desk drawer and shone it at the door. He had to get out. He grabbed the doorknob and pulled, trying to get into the hallway. It wouldn't turn. It wasn't locked. It was fused shut. The metal was hot to the touch, as if it had been melted and welded together. He pounded on the wood, shouting for help, but his voice sounded muffled, distant, as if he were shouting from inside a soundproof booth. He ran back into the studio. The tape reels were still spinning in the darkness, without any power. Vance's voice returned, louder this time, filling the entire room. "The detective didn't believe me," Vance said, his voice overlapping itself, creating a terrifying cacophony. He opened the door to leave, but he just walked further into the room. That's the rule of the room without walls. You can't go out. You can only go further in. Elias was struck with the terrifying realization that the recording wasn't from the past. He looked at the VU meters on his audio console. The needles were moving in real time. The tape was recording him. It was recording his breaths, his heartbeat, his fear. He was the new subject. He looked towards the window. The light in the field was closer now. He could see the figure holding it. It was a tall, thin shadow wearing a detective's trench coat. But where a face should have been, there was only the smooth, spinning plastic of a tape reel. The figure raised a hand and tapped on the other side of the glass. Tap, tap, tap. The glass didn't break. It began to drip. Thick, molten drops of glass fell to the floor, hissing as they cooled. The apartment filled with the smell of ozone and damp earth. Air rushed in from the black field, so cold it burned his skin. Elias recoiled into the corner of the room, clutching his only weapon, a heavy microphone stand. The tape reel-faced figure stepped through the melting window, bringing with it long strands of black grass. The grass spread rapidly across the floor, wrapping around the furniture, coiling around Elias' ankles. The figure stopped in front of the desk. He reached out a hand and pressed the stop button on the tape player. The reel stopped. The silence that followed was profound. It was a silence like that of a tomb. The figure reached into its coat and pulled out a new, blank reel of tape. It placed it on the desk and pointed a long, gray finger at Elias. Then the figure spoke, not with its mouth, but through the room's speakers, the sound vibrating in Elias' lungs. "We have finished with Mr. Vance," the voice boomed, distorted, short and deep. "Now we need a new story. Tell us about the window, Elias." Elias opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out. He looked at the audio monitor. The waveform on the screen was bouncing up and down in red, capturing a scream he couldn't hear. He realized then that he wasn't in his apartment anymore. He was on magnetic tape. He was just a collection of magnetic particles arranged in the shape of a man. The next morning, the apartment on 4th Street was empty. The police broke down the door after neighbors complained of a strange smell, the smell of burnt electronics and damp earth. The apartment was completely bare. No furniture, no appliances, no Elias. The only thing in the room, lying in the middle of the dusty floor, was a cardboard box containing a single reel-to-reel tape. A week later, the same box turned up at a pawn shop in Portland. The clerk, a young woman named Sarah, opened it. She found a note written in shaky, nervous handwriting. "Don't listen to the background noise. Focus on the voice." She shrugged, put the tape in the player, and pressed play. She heard a voice. It was Elias, and he was whispering, "Is this recording?"